The more America turns away from God, the more toward tyranny America's government turns. That's a basic truth. And that's the theme of today's discussion on Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And so today we're going to talk about tyranny, how tyranny takes root and grows. And I have a great guest today who actually has written a book just about that very matter called The Authoritarians. Jonathan Emord is the author, and he is a prolific writer, a fantastic author, and also an attorney who has taken on the federal government, who has taken on the big forces in big government and won. And he's going to talk briefly about that, but also about his book, The Authoritarians. And more importantly, how far has America turned down that path toward authoritarianism? And what can we do about it? What can we do to save our nation? What can we do to save America from the far leftists who have taken over, it seems? These are perilous times in America, that's for sure. Before I get into that, I just want to give a quick heads up to a deal that Washington Times is offering. And that is a discount deal for a year's access to the digital platform of the Washington Times for 50% off. All you have to do is go to washingtontimes.com/Cheryl, type in your info, and you will have immediate access to all that the Washington Times offers on its digital platform. That's not just news and great analysis, breaking news, investigative reports, but it's also great commentaries and podcasts like this very Bold and Blunt podcast you're listening to right now. So I really do hope you subscribe, and I'm asking you to subscribe because fact is, this is still a capitalistic nation. This is still a free market nation. And if people don't pay for the services that they want or need or like, then those services soon enough go away. So it would be a nice thing if you supported the Washington Times. I definitely would appreciate it. And now, back to tyranny in America. Look, I look around the last year and a half of what's been going on in America, and like I said a minute ago, it's perilous times. I can't think of another word to describe it. As a matter of fact, Michael Savage, the iconic radio host, the gem of American talk radio, just said the same thing. It's perilous times in America. Agree. I definitely agree. Look at one of the perils we're facing. People aren't thinking. People aren't thinking any longer. Critical thinking is something that's not just a thing of the past, but it's something that if you happen to be one of those people who try to critically think about issues before acting on them, you are labeled an enemy of the people, an enemy of the state. Don't believe that? Think I'm just pulling that out of thin air? Well, try and be a parent who doesn't want your child to wear a face mask in school this coming school year because you, in all your critical thinking glory, have done your own independent research and found that face masks, while the long promise from government to prevent the spread of the coronavirus, to stop people from getting the coronavirus, and even as being better than the vaccines at one point. Remember that? Remember when we were told the number one way to stop the spread of the coronavirus was to wear a face mask, even more effective than vaccines? Remember that? Well, maybe you've done your critical thinking, due diligence research, and you found that, hey, that's not exactly true. That the face mask in surgical settings may work to prevent large emissions from the mouth or whatever as doctors are operating on patients, and may work in settings where nurses actually do the tying of the face mask on the surgeon, so the surgeon's fingers and fingernails and hands never actually touch the face mask, and the surgeon isn't pulling his face mask down to take sips of his cola and then putting his face mask back back on his face with dirty fingers that have touched, oh, I don't know, books and desks and doorknobs and things like that. And the surgeon isn't pulling the face mask down to take bites of sandwiches in between his operating procedures and then pulling the face mask back up with fingers that drip with mustard and mayonnaise and bacon grease. So maybe face masks work in those settings, but face masks in general on young children who don't even get the coronavirus by and large and don't even transmit the coronavirus to other people by and large and don't get sick from the coronavirus by and large, maybe face masks aren't the best thing for children. Maybe you found during your critical thinking and your due diligence research that face masks actually cause issues for your children. The face mask covers the faces, of course, and so your child is missing out on physical cues. Your child is missing out on expressions of approval, say, from their teacher, or smiles from friends, or just the actual joy of laughing and having that infectious laughter go through a group because you're all looking at one another's faces and they're all broken out in expressions of joy and laughter. Maybe your child is missing out on that, or maybe your child is missing out on unfettered breathing. After all, who wants to wear a piece of cloth over their face all day long, in class, outside of class, even outside? Maybe that causes breathing issues for your child. Or maybe your child just feels stifled and as if something is stuffed over his face because, well, it is. Maybe your child just doesn't like it. Maybe it gets hot. Maybe the face mask gets hot and causes itching to your child. So for whatever the reason you've decided that you don't want your child to wear a face mask in school this year. And so you show up to your school board meeting and you protest what your school board has decided is going to be a mandate going into public schools this fall, that students wear face masks at the bus stop, on the bus, in the classroom, out of the classroom, everywhere except in the lunchroom, because again, this is one of the great mysteries of the coronavirus. When you're eating, the coronavirus does not dare enter that air zone. It's a no-fly zone for the coronavirus. Anyhow, you've decided that you show up to the school board and you oppose the face mask mandate, and boy, watch the backlash start, right? I just saw a video the other day of these parents who sent their 3 kids to school without a face mask, and the children were suspended. And the photo, the image that stands out in my mind of this video is the still shot that was grabbed from the photo of these 3 small children standing there outside the school, banned from school because they don't have a face mask on their face, and they're holding their pink slips, they're holding their suspension slips in front of them. And this is what we've become in this nation. We have taken critical thinkers, and especially independent thinkers, and we've turned them into the enemies. We have turned them into the enemies of the state. We have taken those people who do their own due diligence and who make their own medical decisions, not just for themselves, but as parents, also for their children, and we have turned them into the enemies. They are the new face of all that's wrong with America. And as Geraldo Rivera has self-righteously proclaimed, these are the type of people who must be ordered to stay in their homes, to stay out of their businesses and public venues, to stay off the streets, to stay out of restaurants, to stay out of places of entertainment. They must be confined to their homes. This is the new shape of America. You have the critical thinkers, or you have the independent thinkers. You have those who insist on their God-given rights to freedom and individualism versus those who don't care about that silly old concept of individualism and not just expect but demand that everybody else get on board the same government obedience train that they're currently riding. And there's no room on that train for thinkers. Thinkers are the enemies. Where do you think this is leading? Where do you think all this is leading? When you look at the face masks, right? Do you see, well, it's just the face mask. Put the face mask on, go along to get along, and we will soon enough return to normalcy. If you're still of that mindset, your head is in the sand. As a matter of fact, it's in the sand, and there has been cement poured over that spot in the sand where your head rests so that you can't remove your head. That's how deep in the sand you are right now. The reason we're in the shape we're in this country right now is because people think that if they just go and obey what the government is saying to do for mitigation for the coronavirus, if they just do it, then there will be a return to normalcies. And by normalcy, our definition is before the coronavirus hit, where we all just walked around, no face masks, no vaccines, no talk of vaccine passports and vaccine mandates. That's the return to normalcy that we all think, or at least some of us think, that by doing these small steps that the government wants us to do now, that it will get us back to those pre-coronavirus days. Well, no. That's not going to happen, because it's the people who have gone along with all these mandates that has put us in the spot of escalating mandates. Don't you see that the government's not going to reel back the mandates and the lockdowns and cede back the control that it's grabbed over the last year, cede back the control to the people where it rightly belongs? Don't you see the government's not going away on this? It's not going to happen until people make it happen. That's the harsh reality of where we're at in America right now. That's how tyranny sprouts. 63.1% of Republican primary voters trust governors and state legislators to defend their rights and promote their issues, while only 21.7% trust Republicans in Congress. That is a new survey from the Conventions of State Action in partnership with the Trafalgar Group. Another finding of this recent poll, 63.5% of Democratic primary voters trust President Biden and Democrats in Congress, while only 14.2% trust governors and state legislators. So the takeaway from that is that Republicans basically trust the local levels of government, the smaller levels of government, the levels of government that are more accountable to the people and that aren't in their own bubble on Capitol Hill, aren't surrounded by their own political ambitious selves in Congress. And really, that's how Founding Fathers wanted it. They wanted the power at the local levels. Power to the people first, power to the local governments, power to the state governments, power to the federal government last. That's how it's supposed to work. States' rights, 9th and 10th Amendment, individual rights, the powers remain with the people. Check out the Constitution if you don't know what I'm talking about. 9th and 10th Amendment, those amendments that are rarely talked about, rarely discussed, and so pushed aside by the Democrats / Socialists / Communists that party has become. Look, the fact is, in this country, we're headed rapidly toward a face-off. of what we're going to be in the future. Are we going to be a country where our rights come from God and government is there only to secure those rights? Or are we going to be a country where rights are handed out by government officials at whim to whomever they deem worthy? That means you may have a Second Amendment right, but your neighbor down the street may not. You may have a right to speak freely, but that guy does not. That's what happens when you give government the control of God-given rights. Government becomes God. The Authoritarians. It's a remarkable book. Congressman Dan Burton and John Doolittle wrote the foreword, and Jonathan Emord, longtime friend, longtime fighter for freedom, for individual freedoms, for God-given freedoms, not just certain freedoms, but for God-given freedoms. Jonathan is my guest today, and he's here. He's here to discuss the authoritarians, critical race theory, and what Americans can do to extricate themselves from this authoritarianism that we are living under due to the coronavirus and frightened citizens right now. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Good to be with you.
So let's just start by looking around at the country. And when I look at America right now, amid the coronavirus clampdowns, I see a country in peril. What do you see?
I quite agree. We have a socialist resurgence in this country, and it's infecting every part of government, local, state, and national. It's brought by a zealous minority that is intent on destroying the United States, taking down our Constitution, eliminating all the provisions that protect us against government abuse of power, and ruling in a dictatorial manner, even dismantling the Supreme Court and our system of criminal justice, as well as incarceration of criminals or any responsibility for criminal wrongdoing by those who are the revolutionaries in the vanguard of this. It's no mistake that they seek to defund the police at the same time that they're rioting in the streets. They want no opposition to their ability to destroy private property and destroy government.
And you know, the deeper peril that I see too is that the emerging youth is embracing socialism and bucking capitalism to a greater degree than really ever before seen in this country. That leads me to believe that the future of this nation doesn't look that well either.
That's right. That's in no small measure due to two things: an absence of parental education about the founding principles of this country and our history, as well as a indoctrination in the schools that teaches that America is a colonial power that abuses its power and enslaves the world, and that slavery is the definition of America, and that our origins arise in 1619 in Jamestown when slavery first reared its ugly head in this continent. That, of course, is in stark contrast with the definition of America that is in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, which truly defines who Americans are, and the great history of the United States in overcoming the institution of slavery. Even at the origins of the country, the Founding Fathers were dedicated to the political abolition of slavery, and that was effected ultimately in the triumph of the Civil War and the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Yet the education being given our children is a propagandistic one in which they're told to despise their country, that their country is systemically racist, that the seed of slavery never left but blossomed, and that all institutions, private and public, are exemplary of this slave mentality and of a notion that no matter what a person of color does, no matter what a child who is a person of color does, they are destined to fail, that they will always be behind whites, and that no matter what a white child does, that child is destined to be an oppressor and should be full of shame because they are exemplary of this white generation or class that simply cannot escape its oppression. simply because they define that oppression as linked inextricably to the pigment of the white person's skin. This is racism writ large, and it's Marxism, in which the oppressed are the people of color and the oppressors are the whites. And this division is very ruinous. It leads only to total destruction, and it is predicated on a gross lie that America is a racist country.
And more than that, in a recent opinion piece, you actually wrote that critical race theory is child abuse.
That's correct. It meets the classic definition of child abuse. Every child who's subjected to it, regardless of their race, is forced to view themselves as a failure and as incapable of escaping that failure. And it meets the definition of child abuse. So on the federal level, child abuse would be any action or inaction on the part of a parent or a caretaker that results in serious physical or emotional harm. This is serious emotional harm. It commences at grades K through 12, and it is indelible. It's drummed into them. It's how they define their every aspect of education when CRT takes hold. And it's actionable, and we should be suing educators who engage in it, and administrators who do it, and school boards, and state administrators who finance it and support it, because it is child abuse. And not only that, it violates the Equal Protection Clause. The Equal Protection Clause prevents government, including any part of government, that means any part including the state through the public education system, to classify people based on their race and treat them according to their race. And that's exactly what critical race theory does. It violates the Equal Protection Clause, subject to strict scrutiny if it goes to court, and it should be held unconstitutional. An exercise of unconstitutional power by the state. The state should be forbidden as a matter of law from engaging in any critical race theory education. It is a violation not only of the Constitution, but as we said, it's child abuse.
And what it brings is a sort of permanence to this overall idea that big government is the solution for everything. And as a matter of fact, in your book, The Authoritarians, you actually outline all the government programs and bureaucracies and agencies that started with the New Deal, which a lot on the left are comparing this current administration, the Joe Biden White House, to that same type of era, and suggesting that Joe Biden's biggest dream is to bring forward another New Deal type of America. And it's astonishing to me the extent of the agencies that were created during that short time period. I did not know that.
That's true. The ideology underlying the creation of those agencies is critically important for people to understand. If you abide by the Constitution, you cannot have administrative agencies with combined legislative, executive, and judicial power making the vast majority of laws that govern us, and yet that's what we have. We have a government outside of the government that the Constitution prescribes. We have a Constitution that, as Justice Douglas Ginsburg has famously stated, is a Constitution in exile. And we have instead rule by an oligarchy of bureaucrats in the administrative agencies. They're unelected, they're unaccountable to the courts, the Congress, the American people, and yet they issue the laws that affect us most personally and profoundly in our business and in our transactions. And that is all law created not by those we elect, but by the unelected heads of these agencies who are political appointees. So it is a political court and political system of justice. And the administrative agencies violate all of the provisions of the Constitution and the prosecution of people. Most fundamentally, the agency is both the prosecutor and the judge. As a consequence, there's no justice that's possible in a situation like that. Not only that, they render the accused guilty until proven innocent, reversing the burden of proof that accompanies us under the Constitution. And further, they deny you a right to a jury trial, and they deny you the right to know the charges that are certain. The charges brought against you can be fungible and change, mutating into whatever the agency wants. and most profoundly is the fact that the very party that is bringing the charges against you will ultimately decide your fate in an administrative agency. And then sadly, when appeals go from agencies to the Article 3 courts, the only courts intended by the Constitution, you end up with broad deference to agency decisions, their findings of fact, and their conclusions of law. And so we have a system of guaranteed injustice through that. And the agencies were created by Marxists, by people who believed in Hegelian doctrine of collectivism, who wanted to, intentionally they created the agencies to defeat the power-limiting provisions of the Constitution, so they could have efficiency, they could have rapid action against parties who offended their conception of the common good. And it's been very damaging to private enterprise. It's been very damaging to innovation. And that's what Joe Biden wishes to expand exponentially. He wants to rule as a dictator. He wants to have no need to contend with the Congress of the United States. It's no mistake that he hasn't broached the subject of a collegial interaction with the Republicans. He doesn't need to. He's going to rule through the administrative state. He may ask for congressional assent to particular spending measures, but when it comes to the details of how we will be regulated, what rights we will have, he's going to decide that himself through his executive agencies, and he is already doing it. It's no mistake that he destroyed the backbone. He's destroying the backbone of the economy, the fossil fuel industry, and it's no mistake that he's funding through the Department of Education critical race theory, and it's no mistake that he looks the other way when there's rioting in the streets, no matter how profound the destruction is, and it's no mistake that he leaves the southern border completely open and allows people to run roughshod over private property owners who he gives no protection or relief to, allows terrorists to enter this country through the southern border, allows drug trafficking and sex trafficking through the southern border. There's no limit to what Biden apparently is willing to do against the interests of this country to advance his own personal and political interests, which is tied to the far left of his party.
And you know firsthand, you know full well how the agencies and the agency bureaucrats become the sort of unelected rulers of American citizens, because you in your law practice have fought against the agencies and won successfully, to your credit. But what I want to remark upon is the larger theme here, that I don't want this to escape people's notice, that when these agencies are created, when government creates a body, the body never really disappears. It may morph into something else, or it may be named something else, or it may be swept up under the umbrella of something else. But once government grows, it doesn't recede anytime soon. Is that correct?
That's been the tradition. There have been some agencies that have been eliminated, but the overall effect of these agencies and of this movement to authoritarianism is that the government has grown exponentially without limitation, no matter what the administration has been. And that's even, for example, when I came in the Reagan administration, we were dedicated to extreme deregulation, which was oftentimes achieved. But notice that when we left, the re-regulators came back in and simply expanded the agency's power, regaining the turf that they had lost and expanding it again. That's exactly what Biden has done with the Trump advances in deregulation or in draining the swamp. He's refilled the swamp. He's re-empowered the agencies. He means to do business for his constituency, and he has sold his soul to the socialists. He is definitely a power figure in defense and in advance, not of the American people, but of this far left-wing socialist segment of the Democratic Party that is loudest, most cantankerous, and means to destroy this country.
And that, in effect, is how tyranny takes root and spreads and is very difficult to uproot. And this is where we're at right now. So I just want to finish with this one question to you, because I like leaving people with a little bit of optimism. You look around the landscape, everything that you write about in the Authoritarians is irrefutable. Everything that we just discussed is the sad and grim reality. So where do freedom-loving American citizens turn in order to win back the freedoms from the far left right now?
Let me just say this quickly, that but that the nature of humanity is in favor of liberty. We are a free people. We are born with free agency. We're endowed by God with unalienable rights. The Declaration has it exactly spot on. I believe that as the Biden administration continues to abuse us, that he will unintentionally trigger and inspire us to remember those cords that tie us indelibly to the founding principles of this country. And I believe people will rise up, and we're seeing that already. We're seeing all across the nation people rise up against critical race theory. We're seeing a massive reaction in the southern states and in other states as well against this unbridled open invitation to have no borders. And we're also seeing a rejection from the people of the idea that Biden can be reelected predicated on a socialist agenda. It may have sounded appealing to get something for nothing for many who are in the youthful category, but even they are coming to realize that unless there is law and order, and unless there is a capitalist system, they cannot have an inflation-free existence. They cannot have an existence where opportunity is given to them. They will live as slaves do. Socialism is slavery, and as Margaret Thatcher famously said, the problem with socialism is that you run out of other people's money. And sure enough, we are. We're bankrupting this nation.
I like to believe that that's true, that the more this White House abuses the American citizens, the more we will push back. I know I said that was the last question, but I want to slide this one other one in there, because you and I both agree on the link between belief in God and faith that rights come from above and the state of freedom. So as this country turns more and more secular, are you still just as optimistic that the pushback will go forth and freedoms will be regained?
I am, because I think that the lie that your rights are dependent upon government is spoken to in loudly by a state that with impunity runs roughshod over your rights, saying that it can do so because in an emergency it says you have no rights. This concept of a virus being capable of destroying your civil liberties is utter nonsense, has no feet in our constitutional heritage. The Constitution has no exception for your unalienable rights. It means to protect them. And so this government is proving, that is the Biden administration, is proving its disdain and hatred for our founding principles, for our Constitution, and for our liberties by its every action, by its one-size-fits-all approach to this virus, by compelling people to abide by a one-size-fits-all answer and not allowing freedom to reign. That is an abuse, and I believe it will call us, as all of these actions will, back to our founding principles and to the fundamental appreciation that our rights don't come from the state, that they are endowed by God, and that we are entitled to them, and that they are independent of anything the government does. We are a proud people. We need to regain that pride in our individualism and in our willingness to sacrifice in defense of liberty and do whatever is necessary to ensure the survival and success of liberty.
Good stuff, Jonathan. Good stuff. Thank you so much, Jonathan Emord, author of The Authoritarians. I really appreciate your time on Bold and Blunt.
You're welcome, Cheryl, and I think the world of you, and thank you for everything you're doing.
Oh, thank you. God-given rights, Americans. Those are the only rights worth fighting for, because those are the roots of American rights. Everything else is a skirmish. Everything else is a battle. But the war here in America is to recapture and regain the foothold with our rights as individuals coming from God, not government. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.